Somewhere beyond the ragged fence line, the dawn slipped over the prairie like a memory too heavy to forget. Weston Hale rose before the first sparrows began their chatter, as he had every morning for 9 long years. His boots found the same grooves on the porch boards. His eyes traced the same distant silhouette of the burned-out barn, a ruin still blackened against the sky. The land was wide enough to hold all his loneliness, and perhaps that was why he'd never left it. He told himself there was honor in staying. But even as the wind pressed cold fingers through the gaps in the siding, he sometimes wondered if he was simply afraid of being seen again, of having someone look past his polite nods to the hollow behind his ribs. The truth was, he had built this life to keep others out, and it had worked, until the morning a figure staggered up the long track, each step carrying the weight of some private calamity. She came in uneven lurches, her skirts snagging on tufts of dry grass. The first thing he noticed was how small she looked against the endless sky. The second was that she had no horse, no wagon, nothing but a battered bundle clutched to her chest. For one strange instant, he thought she might be a mirage, some vision conjured by his hunger for company. But then she lifted her head, and he saw the dark bruises blooming along her jaw, the cracked line of dried blood near her temple. Her gaze did not flinch when it met his. It was as if she had nothing left to lose, and in that, they were kin of a sort. Weston's heart gave a slow, reluctant thud. A question bloomed, as unwelcome as it was undeniable. What would drive a woman to walk this far alone in the first pale light of dawn, if not desperation? He did not move to help her. Not at first. He had learned that pity could be as cruel as neglect. So he watched, silent, as she closed the last few steps and gripped the porch post to steady herself. Her fingers were scraped raw, the nails rimmed with dust. She drew in a ragged breath, and her voice slipped out so soft he almost missed it. "Please? I need a place, just for a night." The words sounded rehearsed, as though she'd repeated them over every mile between here and wherever she had fled. He studied her face, trying to decide if this was some scheme, a trick to slip inside and rob him blind. But what thief came with bruises she did not bother to hide? What charlatan's mouth trembled that way when she spoke? He could not have said how long he weighed her silence against his own. All he knew was that when she swayed, he reached forward instinctively, his hand closing around her elbow before he could think better of it. "Sit," he murmured. His voice felt unused, as if it belonged to someone else. "You look near to falling." Her knees buckled, but she did not collapse. She only sank down onto the top step, the bundle in her lap cradled like a child. Weston crouched beside her, careful not to startle her further. He could smell the copper tang of old blood mixed with road dust. Her hair was coming loose from its pins in a ragged braid that fell over her shoulder. He wondered if she had been beautiful once, before fear hollowed her eyes and left her mouth set in that wary line. He wondered why he cared. "I'm not here to trouble you," she said finally, her voice steadier. "I just can't go any farther tonight." "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza Carr." The syllables came out thin, but she met his gaze without apology. "I walked from White Willow. My husband, he won't come looking." She did not elaborate. Weston did not ask her to. He understood the language of leaving too well to demand explanations. Still, something twisted in him, pity maybe, or the memory of how it felt to watch your life burn while you stood helpless. He straightened and held out a hand, waiting until she placed her smaller, battered palm in his. Her skin was cool as river stones. "I'm Weston Hale," he said. "You can have the hearth for the night. No questions, no judgment." Her eyes flickered, a brief flame of relief before the lids fell heavy again. He helped her inside, aware of how the threshold seemed to resist them both. His house was no place for guests. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight as if they too were startled by the intrusion. He guided her to the armchair by the cold fireplace and set her bundle on the braided rug. She curled into the worn cushions as if she meant to vanish entirely. For a long moment, he simply watched her breathing slow, the fragile rhythm of someone who had run too far and too fast. Then he fetched water and a tin cup and placed them within reach. He could feel the old habits reawakening in him, the quiet rituals of tending to another soul. He resented how easily they returned. Yet when he looked at her, he did not feel the revulsion he expected. Only an aching tenderness, so unfamiliar it made him wary. Outside, the dawn had lifted fully, and the world lay raw and bright as an open wound. Later, when she woke, she insisted on washing the cup and folding the threadbare quilt he'd laid across her shoulders. There was a careful precision in the way she moved, as if any small disorder might crack her resolve. He understood that too. In the days after the fire, He had spent hours aligning his boots by the door and straightening the crooked frame on the wall. Grief needed something to fasten itself to. She did not say much, only thanked him in a voice that barely rose above the creak of the rocking chair. He found himself inventing errands outside, checking the fence line for gaps, scanning the horizon for signs of riders, though he knew he was simply giving her space to gather what fragments of dignity she had left. But each time he stepped back through the doorway, he was struck by how her presence changed the hush that had ruled his life. The house did not feel lighter exactly, but it felt inhabited, and that was something he had almost forgotten. On the third morning he found her standing in the yard, her face turned to the sun. Her bruises were fading to yellow and green, her posture less guarded. He paused in the shadow of the porch, struck by the quiet defiance in the angle of her chin. She must have sensed him watching, for she turned and met his gaze without flinching. "You were right," she said softly. "I don't think he's coming after me." He nodded. He had known as much from the start. A man who let his wife walk 20 miles in the dark was not likely to brave the scandal of chasing her. Still, he understood that her fear would take longer to fade than her injuries. "You can stay," he offered before he could reconsider. "If you want." Her mouth opened then closed again. He saw the question in her eyes. Why would he offer such a thing, when he'd made it clear he prized his solitude above all? But she did not voice it and he did not explain. Some things were easier unspoken. From that morning a rhythm began to form. She took over the kitchen with quiet efficiency, baking flatbread that made the room smell almost like a home. He taught her to saddle the old mare, though her hands shook when she first touched the reins. They did not discuss the past. Instead they spoke of small things, the shape of the clouds, the price of flour in town, the way the wind sometimes whistled in the stovepipe. But each evening, when the fire had burned low and the shadows crowded close, Weston found himself listening for her breathing in the next room. It calmed him in a way he could not name. Still, he knew the town would have its opinions. The deputy confirmed as much when he rode out one afternoon, his eyes flicking from Weston to Eliza with an expression that made Weston's shoulders tense. "Folks are talking," Deputy Crow said, voice soft as a blade. "You keepin' her here, people are bound to think the worst." Weston did not look away. "Let them." The deputy's gaze sharpened. "You sure about that? A woman with no kin. A man with a reputation for keeping to himself. Don't take much for stories to grow legs." He waited for Weston to back down, to recant the offer he'd made. But Weston only folded his arms across his chest and held the deputy's stare until Crow spat into the dirt and swung back onto his horse. The silence that followed felt like an accusation and a promise all at once. When the dust settled, Weston found Eliza standing in the doorway, her face pale. "I can go," she whispered. "If it's too much trouble." "No," he said, more sharply than he meant to. Then softer, "No. I don't want you to." The words seemed to surprise them both. He saw her lips part, saw the tremor that passed through her shoulders. In that moment he realized she had been waiting every day for him to send her away. That she had been bracing for rejection as surely as she had braced for the blows she once tried to dodge. "I'm not afraid of their talk," he added. "Are you?" She hesitated. Then slowly she shook her head. "I'm tired of being afraid," she said. "Of everything." Her honesty struck something deep in him, something he thought he had buried for good. Without thinking he reached for her hand. Her fingers curled into his with a tentative strength. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise. But it was more than either of them had dared before. The wind picked up, rattling the loose shutter, but neither of them moved. He felt her pulse flutter against his palm, felt the question rising between them. What might happen if they stopped running from what they had lost? If they dared to let themselves be known? Later, long after she had drifted into exhausted sleep in the chair by the fire, Weston stood in the doorway and looked out over the prairie. The sky was raw and endless and full of possibility he had long refused to see. He thought of the old life he had buried in the ashes, of the years he had spent pretending he was better off alone. And he understood, with a clarity that made his throat ache, that sometimes grace did not arrive with fanfare or forgiveness. Sometimes it came quietly, on blistered feet, carrying nothing but a battered bundle and a heart still beating. He closed the door softly behind him, the latch clicking into place like the final note of a hymn. For the first time in years he did not dread the dawn. He only wondered what it would feel like to wake to something more than emptiness. To someone brave enough to knock and patient enough to stay.